welcome to Big Water Fishing. I'm Captain Ross Robertson. For more than 20 years, I've made my living fishing as a tournament angler, guide, TV host, and outdoor writer, to name a few. Over the last 2 decades, I've been able to fish from the Arctic Circle to Europe to South America. But nowadays, most of our fishing is done on the Great Lakes, specifically the western and central basins of Lake Erie. Come fish with us to learn, catch a big one, or just enjoy a great day on the water. We fish year-round, open water and ice fishing. Subscribe to us on YouTube for videos of our travels, tricks, tips, and even our podcast with the biggest names in the games, interesting stories, and just all-around shenanigans. Check us out at bigwaterfishing.com or Big Water Fishing on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Hey, Captain Ross Robertson here. You know, we're doing a little bit of re-rigging. It's springtime, and that means crankbait fishing for a lot of guys, including myself. And the crew today was kind of amazed that I do a little bit different system than a lot of guys, but it's super, super simple. And one of the biggest mistakes I see guys make, at least in my opinion, is they're using too big of terminal tackle. I'm using a little size 2 dual lock snap, that's it, not a snap swivel. But a lot of times, you know, this time of year we're using, you know, braided line, sometimes we're using snap weights. And so we can get twist in there. And a really easy way of eliminating that is just putting a very small swivel. This is a Spro power swivel, really small, about 3 feet up. The leader is pretty much irrelevant. I'm using the same line as the same Sunline monofilament that's on my main spool. But just a little bit of a leader that's about maybe 3-4 feet. Any longer, and problem is when you're letting out lines or you're netting fish, it gets up into the rod. But all we want to do is get that hardware and not have a lot of weight that's going to affect our crankbait, especially with some of these real finessey kind of crankbaits that we use in the springtime. It's actually going to change the action. So what we want to do is have a little leader in there, but still have a small swivel up there that's not going to affect our action, but it's going to make sure that we don't have that twist in there when you're using something like the snap weights. Simple things like that will actually matter a lot for getting more fish in the boat. You know, crankbait fishing, I don't care what you're doing, it's nice to have something you can quickly detach, whether it's tangles, changing lures out, or just taking them off for the day and not having to cut and retie. And because of that, I use a little dual lock snap. Like this one's a VMC number 2, and its sizing is really important. You know, 1 is a little light, it's a little small, and a 3 is really quite large. So 2 works really well for me, but the thing you need to keep in consideration is it doesn't matter what size you end up going with as long as you're kind of in the game, but make sure that your crankbaits are tuned to that size snap. Believe it or not, it does make a difference. And here's my little tip you probably haven't heard, is there is a wrong way to put it on. You want that so that the snap, the box end there, or the sharp end is facing out, not down, because that will actually grab and dig onto the lure and cause that lure to kind of kick out a little bit. So make sure that the part that opens up like that is facing outward or away from the bill. The right size and having it on the right way will make a big difference when you're crankbait fishing. Spoons, they catch a heck of a lot of fish, but I'll tell you, the thing is choosing the right size. If we get caught up in color, I'm the same way. But paying attention to what size will drastically increase or decrease your catch. And you know, this is a Silver Streak Junior. And this is kind of the all-around Great Lakes killer. It's that perfect size, about the same size as a little Emerald Shine or something like that. But you're gonna catch a lot more fish on this size. But sometimes you have to know when to get larger. Maybe you're catching too small fish, you're getting a lot of junk fish, things like that. Stepping up to a mini and even a salmon-sized spoon to get the little fish off, the junk fish, things like that. And then don't forget to go back down when those fish stop biting. Size matters. Hey guys, Captain Ross Robertson here with FishUSA.com, and I'll tell you what, planer boards are something that is a part of just about every Great Lakes or open water fisherman's program at some point in the year. I'll tell you, you gotta have these things, whether it's to spread the lines out or maybe just, you know, even if you're only running a few lines, to get them away from the boat so you don't have those spooky walleyes that you know won't get bit. But regardless of when you're using them, there's a few little tweaks and things that you need to look at, because just like tuning your crankbaits or your jigs or rigs, you can do the same thing with a planer board to get the most performance out of it. And I like the Church TX22. It's my favorite board by far for pulling spinners. But there's a few things I do out of the box that will take you about 5 seconds to do that make a big difference. And the first thing is I like to put the flag system on. And it's really, I like it on the Church a lot because it's solid. You know, these things get kicked around the boat, thrown in the buckets, in the live well, you know how it goes. Murphy's Law, you're out in the boat, anything happens. And it's solid, it's rock solid, they last. The other thing is incremental adjustments. That easy. You can make that. So if you've got a 1 ounce on one rod or a 2 ounce on another, you're going to want to have a little bit different adjustment, and just it's as simple as that. You can see how much tighter that tension is on that. The other thing you want to do, or at least I like to do, is move the weight back in the 22. You can see here that weight originally is supposed to be far forward there. Move that all the way back. Just simply drill a little hole, and I just move that back maybe a 1/2 inch. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow that board to ride a little more nose up and a little more tail down. It's going to make that a lot more sensitive. It's going to ride a lot better in rough water. So probably a few other things too, depending on how you're fishing, but that little tweak is huge. But to take it even one step farther, something that I think everybody that's been out there has had their stuff tangled up, whether it's a wave, a fish that takes it under, or maybe you just put too much line between your clips, is I like to put a swivel in there. So I can completely rotate this. When it gets all wrapped up, I just unhook it and I kind of let it naturally come out, which you can't do if you don't have a swivel in there. And what you do is you actually just put a swivel on there and use a little split ring to make the attachment. Now, of course, you know Murphy's Law again is going to kick us, and if you had all that open and exposed, you're going to get your fishing line caught in there. I've been there, I've done it. So what I do to combat that is I put a little piece of heat shrink on right up against the bead and on the front half of the swivel. If you get too much on it, just take a little razor blade and cut it, and that's going to make sure that that whole thing doesn't get caught up. So there's just a few tips. It costs you just a few bucks to do, and it'll make a big difference next time you guys go out and pull some spinners with planer boards. You know, what is a dipsy diver? Simply put, a dipsy diver is a directional diver that is forced down. There's a big hunk of lead in the back here. And as you angle this, the settings go from 0 to 3, both left and right, and it will angle out as you adjust this weight. So you can actually cover, kind of like underwater planer boards, you can cover different areas of the water column and also distances away from the boat, which allows you to run multiple rods and cover more water. You've got a little tripping mechanism that allows this to force down, and when the fish bites, the dipsy is released so you're not fighting the diver itself. Simply put, you can get very deep, whether you're fishing salmon, steelhead, or walleyes, with a dipsy diver. You know, rigging the dipsy diver setup is incredibly important, and here's a little few tips and tricks that I think you'll find after a lot of hours of pulling dipsies that'll make a big difference. One is using braided line. For most of my trolling applications, I'm using monofilament line, but you actually want to use braid because you don't want that stretch. You want that dipsy to be able to dive deeper, number one. Number two, you want to be able to see the bites because of the no stretch, and then you also want the release to be able to function very easily. Where with monofilament, you're going to have a lot of jello, and you're going to have a lot of sling in there, and it's going to not trip the release when you want it tripped. From the braided line down to the diving device, I use a snap swivel. And I use a good quality one. It's probably a very much overkill for walleyes, but you have to remember in a lot of the waters that you're going to fish, you may have salmon, steelhead, or other species, and a lot of wear and tear goes on this connection. So make sure that you use something with a good quality clasp and something with a good swivel. The other thing I like to do is put a small bead on the front, because that's going to keep the diver from going up into the rod tip. And believe it or not, people keep reeling and they go into the rod tip. A little trick for you is use different colored beads so that you can tell what settings are on. So I use different beads knowing that this is my 1 setting or my 2 setting, so when I pick the rod up quickly, I don't have to look at the diver. From a distance, I can see where the setting is actually at. It may sound like a silly tip until you're in the heat of battle, but simply putting some different colors of electrotape on the handle is also going to let you know that this rod is a 1 setting or a 2 setting, or that it's your inside rod or your outside rod, because when buddies help, you get the kids going and rods are all over the place. The worst thing you can do is put an outside rod on the inside or a left on the right. You're going to cross up and tangle everything. So something as a couple wraps of electrical tape are going to allow you to know which rod goes where. The leader comes off the back, and I use a number 3 snap on the back. I just put that on backwards so that I don't have to attach and unattach and cut leaders. And that goes down to, like in this case, it's about a 6-foot leader, 5 to 6 foot leader. And for most of my crankbait and spoon applications, that's going to be perfect. Now I also carry some extra leaders with me on a noodle that are 10, 12 foot long for when using crawler harnesses or fishing cranks in extremely clean water. And they just have a little number 2 dual lock at the end and then a small swivel to make the connection to the diver itself. Usually the leaders are made out of 20-pound fluorocarbon line. Storage can be an issue with dipsy divers, whether you're moving from spot to spot or you're going home for the day. You can see very easily these things are going to tangle around. You're going to have a big wad full and have to cut them up. So simply put, I use a little clamp here. This one's made for woodworking, but really any little clamp will do. And you put that on there, and that way very quickly you're going to have a way of you're not tangling this up. You're going to make sure you grab one rod, get one rod, and this works equally as well in the boat or in the garage. When you see a rod tip bouncing with a fish on, but maybe he hasn't tripped it. You know, some fish will swim with and they're bouncing it, but they haven't. What you want to do is put your finger on the rod and just gently kind of jerk that just ever so slightly. And that way you're going to feel that release trip. It's just a very sensitive deal. Don't do anything drastic, because anything drastic means the fish is probably going to come off. One of the tricks with dipsy divers is to hold the leader so nothing gets tangled up. One of the worst things you can do is allow this leader to get tangled around the release, because it's going to cut off the entire dipsy. So we want to put this down, then kind of toss it in, and either have the clicker on or have it in your hand when you're deploying it. You don't want to go down too fast with the diver itself. Another thing you want is a very sturdy rod holder. Like I'm fishing for walleyes, they're probably not going to break a rod holder, but steelhead, which often hit these things, can, or if you're fishing around areas that have king salmon. So I want this rod to be down, and I want it to be parallel with water. So I want that rod tip very close to the water. Then my second rod is going to be up here, and you notice it's just a little bit higher, so I can get that out. Now my inside diver, which I always mark with red tape, my higher diver, which is marked with either white or black tape, is going to be a little bit longer. So this is a 7.5 foot rod, where my high diver is going to be 8.5. So that tip not only can't crash, but I can use them just like planer boards to see the reference, to see if I have a fish on that's just really small or dragging. And I'm not going to crash into there, but yet it's going to be low. So the amount of line I was actually going to be in the water to get diving depth. So let them out slow, make sure you got the right rod holder set up, and you're going to catch a lot more fish on dipsy divers. So again, you know, I started running big boards, but it's been a long time, and Chip does this a heck of a lot more than I do. I mean, how far do you really need on spacing? I mean, do you, on certain days, is there conditions that cause you to put them farther apart?
Yeah, depending on the wave condition and stuff, or if you're crabbing a little bit, we're going pretty good downwind right now, so stuff's pulling pretty straight. But if we were trying to trough it and they wanted it in the trough, so then you got to spread things out a little farther, just so you don't get tangles. It's all trying to keep out tangles, but these bandits run pretty true and steady.
Because it may be a different boat and a different game, tangles are still a dirty word. It's 4 letters. So unlike my deal, we're going to hook this up with a rubber band, just doing a half hitch. We're going to leave that thing whole, and then we're actually going to put the release. Oh,
are we going to?
We might.
You were unprepared.
I'm not unprepared. That's Captain Chaos over here. Thanks, sir. So then, take our good old snap here, or a little release, and we're going to put that right in there like that. So not that we would ever catch white bass, but if we did, that rubber band's going to stretch out like that, and we don't have to try to pull that little fish out of that release.
I have never seen you catch a white bass, ever. Ever. It's always walleye.
Just so you know, camera guy is getting a raise. So this is kind of like a musical chairs thing. Whether you have a release pop or you're catching fish, you're just going to kind of next man up and keep sliding them down. And that's why it's really important that you don't crank right away, right? You want that fish to pull out of the spread, because now our leads are all off from what they were 5 minutes ago even.
Yeah, that's the whole concept behind all this stuff. When you get a fish on, pops off the line, it drops back, so it comes over all your inside lines and hopefully doesn't tangle. If everything works right in theory, which usually does, but.
You know, probably one of the most frequently asked questions about planer boards at Fish USA is, hey, should I use inline boards or big boards? And really, there's not a correct answer to that. It depends on what you're doing. You know, like in my case, I'm in a 21, 22 foot boat most of the time, and we're making short passes. We're going with the wind. We're not going, you know, into them like you would on a big bow rider. Maybe you've got a 30 foot hardtop boat. It's going to be able to circle into 2-3 foot waves, and you're pulling things at faster presentations. Inline boards really excel when you want to make short passes, you're in and out quickly, and you want to also have a variety in your spread, meaning I can run anything from a split shot on my high board to a bottom bouncer in the inboard, and it really doesn't matter. Where with big boards, you're going to want to have most of your leads very close together, let's say 80 back or 60 back, whatever that number may be, but you don't want to have one 100 back and another 30 back, because it's going to be much more apt to tangle, if not almost guaranteed. So it's not as versatile from that standpoint. But when you want to run a ton of lines, maybe you're running because you've got a bunch of people, you're going to run 10, 12, 15 lines, there's probably nothing faster than big boards for getting things in and out quickly, not fighting the board itself. But when it comes to keeping things, light, making quick changes, running a variety of presentations, inline boards are just flat out probably going to be a better presentation for you. A jet diver, a lot of people don't even know what they are. And like many of the walleye systems, we kind of have this via the salmon industry where they originally were intended. And simply, there's a few things. A lot of my rigging is just like a dipsy diver, so if you haven't seen this, go check out that video. The difference is I do put a snap swivel up here, where I don't on a lot of my other rigging systems, and I also put a little bead, and that's going to keep my rod tip from getting chewed up, so the bead goes into the rod tip, not the metal device. And then this is all factory stock stuff. The only thing that I add on, just like a dipsy diver, is I put a small snap on the bottom so that I can take my leader on and off without cutting or retying. Now with jet divers, like this is a Model 30. They come in 10s, 20s, 30s, and 40s. And the bigger the number, the deeper they're gonna go. But much like a crankbait, this is a forced dive system. Think of it just like a floating crankbait. At rest, these are gonna rise up to the surface, and at dive, they're gonna go down. So they're really nice to use in conjunction with dipsy divers, because on planer boards, which is typically where I use these, they're gonna float up so we don't have to tangle, and we can spread more lines and then air up instead of airing down like we will with the dipsies, because they're going to sink at rest or on a slow side turn, where these are going to rise up. Another little trick I like to do is a lot of them that I buy are clear, and I paint them flat black, again for just stealth, but then I leave the end open so I can not only read the number very easily, but I can see, because if they get water in them, which they do over time, they're pretty much done and they're going to sink, they're not going to dive the same. So that's why I like getting a clear model versus over some of the plated or the completely painted models. Your leader itself, like I mentioned, comes right off. No different than I do with any of my other rigging. I've got a small Spro power swivel that I can click in and out to the dual lock snap. And then I've got a leader of approximately 6 feet. Much longer, and netting becomes very difficult. But the one thing you'll kind of notice here is I use fairly heavy leader, so I don't have to replace it a lot. This is actually 20-pound leader material, but it's very stiff, which is important because that allows me to get extra kick on stuff like spoons or very subtle baits. You're going to get more action imparted, which is really, really critical when using small spoons or going at slower speeds. So off of this leader, I can use basically any type of shallow diving thing. The one deal you cannot do is you can't use deep diving baits off this. It'll actually counter-react and it'll cause this diver to come to the surface. So small, shallow stick baits, spoons, and even nightcrawler harnesses work very effectively off of jet divers. Lure Jensen or other manufacturers have dive charts that are available, so you know exactly where they're at, much like a crankbait.
What's your favorite color, baby?
Easily the #1 most asked question, whether it's from you guys on YouTube, my website, Facebook, or at seminars, is, hey, what color? And I kind of wonder, are you watching my stuff and telling you that that's like the 10th or 15th most important thing? Speed, location, depth in the water column, profile, all of these things are probably more important day in, day out than color. But does color matter? Of course, we've all been out there when we're catching them on one given thing, and let's be honest, right now I've probably got 500 different reef runners in my boat color-wise. There's a reason. At some point, those things have all worked for me. So kind of a little brief rundown is on the Great Lakes right now, chrome is really hot. Chrome blue, if I had to have one, would be the deal. And sometimes we've got orange bellies on them, sometimes not. But chrome blue is a good deal, or just chrome. But then, kind of inversely, back in the day here, maybe let's say 5 to 10 years ago, the bare naked stuff was really, really hot. Something that, in the clean water had a little more see-through in the profile, and that makes a big difference. Sometimes in the dirty water, we're really looking at like white-based lures. We're looking at more high-vis, neon type things. But I think the big thing, looking at this spoon, because this is pretty neon right here, as a good example is, like spoons, the back color. How many times have you been out there and you're catching them on pink backs or copper backs or silver backs or gold backs? I think a lot of what it is, just like my spinner blades or the crankbaits, it's the contrast. You want something, when you look at some of these hot lures, like this has got a dark back, it rolls into a light side with contrast and a different color belly. The same thing with the spoon here. We've got a dark edge, we've got high vis, and then we go to a completely different flashy color. Look for things that create a lot of contrast, so those fish, as they're looking up at it, if you've ever been swimming in a pool and you look up in the sky, you realize that these fish are seeing a lot different setups than we are. So don't look at just the specific color, but think of the setup of the lure, and that's often probably why you're catching more fish on that given pattern. You know, fishing nets are really overlooked in importance, and I see a lot of guys out there and they've got a $5 net, and if you think about it, a net is something you grab for each and every fish, and it's really an important thing. And a couple of things that I look for is I like a really big hoop. I don't want to thread the needle at all, and I also like a really long handle, as long as I can manage, which this one is 9 foot long. And you know, you're not going to have 9 foot of use when you really figure out, you know, a 3-foot handle is basically about 1 foot of actual use. So the longest handle I can get, I want. And then also I like a good treated bag. This is a replacement bag here, and what I've actually done is, because I don't want it too deep, this has a flat bottom in it, which is something I like, but I don't need this thing super deep. Even here, I could put a pike in this thing. So what I've done is I've cut down the rings. I've cut down and I eliminated, on this particular model, 5 of the rings, so I shallow this bag up by maybe 6, 7, 8 inches, something like that. And that's the way I'm not gonna have as much, you know, as the fish rolls in there that I'm gonna have to deal with, so it's gonna be more tangle free. And then the last little kind of tip that I do here really is I use a magnet. And there's a lot of different ways you can do these things, but basically just zip tie a magnet on each end here. And that's gonna keep that bag from not only catching rod holders in the boat, but when you put that net near the water, it's not gonna go backwards. So when you have this bag kind of drifting backwards, you know, you're gonna grab the fish and the hooks before you get them in the bag. I guess one other thing that I could point out here that I do too is I have these little kind of life jackets made for my net custom, and the reason I have that is I don't get any of the sharp edges as that net gets thrown around. They're not going to drag onto my fiberglass and damage things. It makes a big difference for keeping your boat nice. You know, in this one here I just did a little bit smaller diameter. I just put a swim noodle on there and put a couple of swim noodle pieces on there and then zip tied it, and that's going to keep the little screws that are exposed there from dragging and getting scratched on my boat. So a couple different nets here. You see I got that big one. This is kind of my small fish net. It's a rubber net. I grab this thing kind of as for small fish, or when I know something's going to get really tangled up, because it's a rubber bag. I got this one at Fish USA. It's kind of nice because it's got bigger holes on the bottom and it's a lot deeper than most rubber nets. Most rubber nets are too shallow for me and the fish kind of bounces out. And this one's a little bit deeper and it's got a little bit longer handle. So this is my last minute throw it in the boat type deal. I can grab them real quick. You guys have seen some videos where I've used this net. And then I got my big fish net that you guys have seen me use for years. 9 foot handle, big bag, big fish, get him in every time. So think about having a good net. Junky net, no good. You know, something that I use, I'm just can't believe that guys don't use them more, are rod socks. There's a lot of different names for them, but basically they're just like a rigging loom deal. But one little trick that I take is I like to get a model that's a lot shorter than what they say in the package, because I don't want this going all the way down. Because like my spinners or my crankbaits that I may leave on there, or spoons or diving devices, I want to have some extra room here so that I don't have to have that, you know, getting caught up in the device. So in some cases, I've taken my old ones and I've cut them off at the end, and I've just wrapped a little electrical tape on there or heat shrink so that I can shorten that up. And the other thing that I do is, you look in my rod lockers, you know, I've got different colors, and those all mean something for me. So whether it's in the garage or in my rod locker, I can grab a rod really quickly and I know what that is for my system. Certain ones are braid rods or mono rods or leaders or no leaders. So come up with a little system. And rod socks can not only be an organization thing, but they can keep all your rods from tangling up. I've even gone to using them on the rods that I keep on the deck that are kind of my daily rods. And that's going to keep so I can have 4 rods right next to each other. I grab one, get one, and don't have a hot mess. I'm frequently asked, what is a fish hawk? And simply put, a fish hawk is a speed and temp probe that, while temperature is pretty obvious, the speed thing allows us to adjust for underwater currents. Believe it or not, what your speed over ground on your GPS is and what your lures are doing are often two different things. And understanding that is really the way to unlock how to catch more fish. What actually a fish hawk does is this speed wheel is going to be placed down close to where our lures are at. So we're actually going to get a true speed over ground, not at our GPS, but where our lures are running. Because set and drift or the currents are going to change, so our lures are not actually running at what we think they are as we turn left, right, go into waves, go with waves, underground obstructions, etc. So something as simple as the fish hawk here, which runs completely on batteries, totally wireless, is going to help us catch more fish. So there's a few components to make this Fish Hawk X2 totally portable. One we're going to use is simply a steel leader. You can use multiple things, but this is good and durable, and that's going to allow my sinker, and you can use many different things. Something like a 1 or a 2 pound weight is all you really require. This torpedo weight allows a little bit more cutting of the current and waves. Something like this we're going to get away, and then we're going to use a high quality, or at least a heavy duty, so you don't have any componentry dropping the expensive probe in the water, snap and swivel. Then we're going to take that to a rod and reel. This is actually a Fish Hawk rod and reel. You don't have to have this, but it's pretty convenient and nice. And we're going to use heavy braid, like this is 50-pound braid on a line counter rod and reel. The Fish Hawk module is actually water activated, so there's no switches to turn on or off. Place that in a rod holder. Like I said, I use an old line counter reel with heavy braid, approximately 50-pound test, maybe a little bit more, and lower the probe down. I don't like putting it at the exact level that I'm fishing, but close to it so we have an idea of exactly what our lures are facing. The Fish Hawk X2 LCD screen also operates on battery, so you can take it from boat to boat, put it in the compartment like I do when not in use, and I like to mount mine on a little slide track here in my birch track so I can take it in and out very easily and move it around in the boat. Instead of a large corded transducer like the larger and more original X4, all we're going to do is simply place this on our line, as this is our receiver. Place the receiver on the line and just simply, it's kind of like Chinese straws, turn the top and that will slide right to the bottom. The transducer just needs to be in the water. You don't have to have it down by the probe or even halfway down. At the Fish Hawk probe, we were at 1.1 miles an hour. Our speed over ground is actually 1.2 to 1.6 as we're surging, but it's steady at about 1.3, 1.4. So that set and drift as the currents are here, it's about 2 to 3 tenths. And that can make a big difference if we're going too fast or going too slow. This is especially important when you're on flat open water and you go and you're catching fish going one direction, but when you turn around and you come back and you're not catching fish, because those underwater currents that we can't see are pushing our lures a lot faster or dragging them down a lot slower than what we realize. Knowing what your lure is actually doing down there, believe it or not, 4, 5, 6, 7 tenths of a mile an hour can be the difference from the set and drift or the way that the currents are changing from your lure to your speed over ground on your GPS. And that makes all the difference between the diving depth, if you're using weights, if you're using floating lines, or if that lure is even working at all. Something like this is going to make it absolutely no questions asked, 100% guaranteed to know what your lures are doing. With an effective speed of 0.8 miles an hour to pretty much as fast as you control, the X2 is going to let us know what our lures are doing.